I thought I was being funny, maybe cruel, but still funny. I told him I couldn't tell the difference between him and my toy. I didn't expect him to go silent. I didn't expect him to smile. And I definitely didn't expect him to leave me stranded, humiliated, and crying outside a neon-lit sex shop, while the staff inside laughed and took photos. It was a Thursday night in November, and I was lying in bed next to Alex feeling more frustrated than satisfied. We'd just finished what could generously be called intimacy, though it had been another disappointing encounter that left me wondering why I was even bothering to maintain the physical aspects of our relationship. The bedroom was dimly lit by the lamp on Alex's nightstand, casting shadows that somehow made the whole scene feel more depressing than romantic. The sheets were tangled from our lackluster attempt at passion, and the silence between us felt heavy with unspoken disappointment and growing resentment. Alex was lying next to me with that satisfied expression that men get when they think they've done a good job, completely oblivious to the fact that I was feeling more disconnected and unsatisfied than ever. He'd even made some comment about how great it had been, how much he'd missed being close to me like this. His words hit me wrong in every possible way. Here I was feeling completely unfulfilled and emotionally distant, and he was acting like we'd just shared some incredible intimate moment. It felt like he was either completely clueless about my experience or deliberately ignoring it to protect his own ego. The disconnect between his satisfaction and my frustration was so stark that it made me angry. How could he be so pleased with something that had left me feeling more alone than if we hadn't been intimate at all? How could he not see that our physical relationship had become mechanical and unsatisfying? That's when my mouth decided to deliver what I thought would be a cutting observation that would finally force him to acknowledge how disappointed I was with our intimate life. In a moment of bitter honesty, I told him that I couldn't even tell the difference between him and my vibrator. The words came out sharp and dismissive, designed to puncture his satisfaction and make him understand exactly how unsatisfied I'd been feeling. I expected him to get defensive, to argue with me, to demand an explanation, or at least show some kind of emotional response to such a cruel comparison. I was prepared for a fight, maybe even hoping for one, because at least anger would have shown that he cared enough to be hurt by my words. But Alex's reaction was nothing like what I expected. He went completely quiet, not in the shocked way of someone who's been caught off guard, but in the calculating way of someone who's carefully considering their options. His face didn't show hurt or anger or even surprise. Instead, he just looked at me for a long moment, then gave me this small, unreadable smile that made my skin crawl. The smile wasn't sad or bitter or even forced. It was calm and almost satisfied, like I'd just given him exactly what he needed to make some important decision. It was the kind of smile that suggested he was already 3 steps ahead of me in some game I didn't even know we were playing. Then he just turned over and went to sleep, as if my cutting comment had been nothing more than casual conversation. No argument, no defense, no emotional reaction whatsoever. Just that unsettling smile and then silence. I lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling and wondering what that smile had meant. Part of me was disappointed that my cruel comment hadn't provoked the confrontation I'd been expecting. Another part of me was increasingly uneasy about his complete lack of reaction to such a personal attack. I thought I'd gotten away with it, that my moment of cruelty had been absorbed without consequence. I had no idea that I'd just handed Alex the perfect weapon to use against me. I'm Zoe, I'm 27, and I joke too fast, apologize too slow, and this time, I picked the wrong moment to be clever. My mouth has always been faster than my brain when I'm frustrated or angry, and it's gotten me into more trouble than I care to admit. Alex and I had been together for about a year, and our relationship had reached that comfortable but problematic stage where the initial excitement had worn off, but we hadn't yet figured out how to maintain passion and connection in the day-to-day reality of being together. The decline in our physical relationship had been gradual but undeniable. In the beginning, we couldn't keep our hands off each other. Every touch felt electric, every kiss was passionate, every intimate moment felt like an adventure we both craved. But somewhere along the way, that electricity had dimmed to barely a flicker. Maybe it was the stress of work, or the routine of spending so much time together, or just the natural progression of relationships settling into predictable patterns. Whatever the cause, our physical connection had become something we did out of obligation rather than genuine desire. Alex was sweet and considerate, but he lacked the confidence and intensity that I craved in intimate moments. He was gentle and careful, always asking if everything was okay, always making sure I was comfortable. In the beginning, his attentiveness had been refreshing after dating guys who were more focused on their own pleasure. But as time went on, his cautious approach started to feel more like insecurity than thoughtfulness. I wanted passion and spontaneity, not careful choreography and constant check-ins. I wanted to feel desired and consumed, not like a fragile flower that might break if handled too roughly. I'd started relying more on my vibrator than on Alex for physical satisfaction, which had become a source of private resentment that I'd never voiced directly. The toy was consistent, reliable, and effective in ways that Alex simply wasn't. My comment about not being able to tell the difference between them had been cruel, but also honest. Both provided physical relief without emotional connection, but at least the vibrator was efficient about it. Alex had always been sensitive about his performance and his ability to satisfy me, though he'd rarely voiced these insecurities directly. I'd caught him looking hurt or withdrawn after particularly disappointing encounters, but he'd always claimed everything was fine when I asked. What I didn't understand was that my casual cruelty had been building toward this moment for months. Every disappointed sigh, every lack of enthusiasm, every comparison to past relationships had been chipping away at his confidence and building resentment that I was too self-centered to recognize. The days following my cutting comment were strange and unsettling. Instead of being distant or cold, Alex seemed oddly upbeat and attentive. He was making plans, suggesting activities, acting more engaged with our relationship than he'd been in months. He'd text me sweet messages during the day, ask about my work, even suggest romantic gestures like weekend getaways or special dinners. It was like my cruel comment had somehow motivated him to try harder rather than driving him away. I was confused, but pleased by his sudden enthusiasm. Maybe my harsh honesty had been exactly the wake-up call our relationship needed. Maybe he'd finally understood that I needed more passion and effort from him. On Monday evening, Alex announced that he wanted to plan something special for Friday night. He said he'd been thinking about how to spice things up between us, and he had an idea for a fun night out that would be different from our usual routine. I was intrigued and excited by his mysterious planning. This seemed like exactly the kind of spontaneous, adventurous gesture that had been missing from our relationship. Maybe he was finally ready to step outside his comfort zone and show me the passion I'd been craving. He was being secretive about the details, saying only that he wanted to surprise me with something memorable that would show me how much our relationship meant to him. He told me to dress up and be ready for an adventure that would take us somewhere we'd never been before. Friday afternoon, I spent extra time getting ready, choosing a dress that was both elegant and slightly provocative, doing my hair and makeup with more care than usual. I was genuinely excited about our evening together, and optimistic that Alex was finally ready to address the passion deficit in our relationship. When Alex picked me up around 8 p.m., he seemed relaxed and almost cheerful, in a way I hadn't seen from him in months. He complimented my appearance, put on music I liked, and seemed genuinely excited about whatever he had planned for us. We drove across town toward a part of the city I wasn't familiar with, an area that seemed more industrial and less residential than our usual haunts. When I asked where we were going, Alex just smiled and said it would be worth the wait. The neighborhood we ended up in was definitely not what I'd been expecting for a romantic evening out. The streets were mostly empty, except for a few late-night businesses and the occasional pedestrian hurrying by with their head down. Alex pulled up in front of what looked like a small boutique with dim lighting and no clear signage visible from the street. The windows were tinted dark, and there was nothing obviously indicating what kind of business it was. He told me he had to grab something quickly and would be right back. He said I should wait outside since he'd only be a few minutes and didn't want to waste time finding parking. I was confused by the mysterious errand, but assumed it was part of whatever surprise he had planned. Maybe he was picking up a gift or making arrangements for the next part of our evening. As soon as Alex's car pulled away from the curb, the neon lights above the storefront flickered to life, and I realized with growing horror what kind of establishment I was standing in front of. The sign read, Pleasure Palace, in bright pink cursive letters, with smaller text advertising adult toys, lingerie, and novelty items. The darkened windows suddenly made sense, as did the discreet location in this quiet industrial area. I was standing outside a sex shop, alone, in my elegant dress and heels, with no purse, no coat, and no way to contact Alex since he'd driven off with my bag still in his car. My phone buzzed with a text message that made my blood run cold as I read it. Since your toy and I are the same, maybe you'll feel more at home here. Have a good night. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. This wasn't a romantic surprise or an adventurous date. This was calculated revenge, planned and executed with surgical precision to humiliate me in the most degrading way possible. Alex had used my cruel comment about not being able to tell the difference between him and my vibrator as justification for abandoning me outside an adult store, like some kind of twisted poetic justice. I tried calling him immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail. I sent desperate text messages explaining that I understood why he was upset and begging him to come back and get me, but there was no response. Through the tinted windows of the shop, I could see staff members moving around inside. When they noticed me standing outside, a few of them came to the window to stare. Some were clearly amused by my situation, whispering to each other and pointing while I stood there in my fancy dress looking lost and desperate. I tried knocking on the door to ask if I could wait inside until Alex returned, but one of the employees shook his head and pointed to a sign indicating they were closed. Even if they'd been open, I doubt they would have been sympathetic to my predicament. The staff inside seemed to think my situation was entertaining rather than concerning. I could see them taking photos through the window, probably planning to share them with friends or post them on social media as an example of someone having the worst night ever. That's when it started to rain. The November evening was already cold, and I was wearing a dress more suitable for indoor dining than standing outside on a concrete sidewalk. My heels were completely inappropriate for the wet pavement, and I had no coat or umbrella to protect me from the weather. As the rain intensified, I was forced to huddle against the building wall under a small overhang that provided minimal shelter. My carefully styled hair was getting soaked, my makeup was starting to run, and my dress was becoming damp and uncomfortable. Pedestrians occasionally walked by, and their reactions ranged from curious glances to outright stares. Some people clearly recognized the type of establishment I was standing outside of and drew their own conclusions about why I might be there. A middle-aged man walking his dog stopped to ask if I worked there, apparently assuming I was an employee taking a break outside. When I explained that I was just waiting for someone, he gave me a skeptical look and hurried away. A bouncer from a nearby bar came over to ask if everything was okay, but his tone suggested he thought I was soliciting rather than stranded. When I tried to explain my situation, he just laughed and told me to have a good night, clearly not believing my story. The worst part was when a group of college-aged guys walked by and recognized me from somewhere, probably through mutual friends or social media. One of them took a photo of me, huddled against the sex shop wall, soaking wet and looking miserable. I begged them to delete the photo, trying to explain that this wasn't what it looked like, but they just laughed and walked away. I knew that image would be shared in group chats and social media within hours, becoming another humiliating piece of evidence about my disastrous evening. By midnight, I was shivering uncontrollably. My dress was soaked through, and I'd given up hope that Alex was coming back for me. I finally swallowed my pride and called my friend Sarah, who lived across town and had to work early the next morning. Sarah was confused and concerned when I explained where I was and why I needed a ride, but she didn't ask too many questions over the phone. She just said she'd be there as soon as possible and told me to stay safe. The 20-minute wait for Sarah's arrival felt like hours. More people walked by, some taking photos, others making comments that ranged from sympathetic to mocking. I felt like I was on display for everyone's entertainment, a cautionary tale about women who end up in compromising situations. When Sarah finally arrived and saw me huddled against the wall of the sex shop, soaking wet and shivering, her face went through several expressions before settling on a mixture of sympathy and disbelief. The drive home was mostly silent, except for Sarah occasionally asking if I was okay and whether I needed to go to a hospital. I assured her I was fine physically, just cold and humiliated, but I could tell she was struggling to understand how I'd ended up in such a bizarre situation. The social media fallout started before I even got home. The photo the college guys had taken was already making rounds on Instagram and Snapchat, with captions like, "Rough night at Pleasure Palace," and "When your Friday night goes wrong." Someone had even made it into a meme with text about knowing your worth. A blurry video of me standing outside the shop had been posted to TikTok with a caption asking viewers to guess what happened to leave someone stranded outside a sex shop in the rain. The comments were a mixture of genuine concern and cruel jokes about my situation. By Saturday morning, the story had spread through several social circles, with people sharing their own theories about why I'd ended up outside an adult store, looking desperate and abandoned. Most of the speculation was unkind and based on assumptions about my character and lifestyle. When I finally got home around 1 a.m., I was hoping against hope that Alex would be there, waiting to explain himself, or at least apologize for taking his revenge so far. But the apartment was empty, and most of his belongings were gone. On my bed, arranged with deliberate precision, was my vibrator and a handwritten note. "He doesn't talk back. Hope you two have fun." The note was written in Alex's careful handwriting, and the casual cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. He'd not only abandoned me outside a sex shop as punishment for my cruel comment, but he'd also ended our relationship and moved out while I was stranded there. The symbolism was obvious and devastating. I'd compared him unfavorably to my vibrator, so he'd left me with the toy and removed himself from my life entirely. The message was clear. If I preferred my vibrator to him, I could have it exclusively. I spent the rest of the weekend trying to process what had happened and dealing with the social fallout of my public humiliation. Friends were texting with questions and concerns. Family members were asking what was going on after seeing social media posts, and strangers were still sharing photos and videos of my lowest moment. Alex had blocked me on every platform and wasn't responding to any attempts at communication. Through mutual friends, I learned that he'd moved in with a buddy temporarily and was telling people that we'd broken up due to incompatibility issues. The reflection period that followed was brutal and ongoing. In quiet moments, I replayed that Thursday night conversation and thought about all the different ways I could have expressed my frustration with our physical relationship. I could have talked to Alex honestly about what I needed from him. I could have suggested ways to improve our intimacy together. I could have been patient with his insecurities instead of attacking them with cruel comparisons. Instead, I'd chosen the most hurtful possible way to express my dissatisfaction, comparing him to an inanimate object in a way that attacked his masculinity and sexual adequacy at the most vulnerable possible moment. But Alex's response had been so calculated and humiliating that it was hard to feel entirely responsible for what happened. He hadn't just ended our relationship or confronted me about my cruel comment. He'd orchestrated an elaborate public humiliation designed to destroy my dignity and social reputation. He'd used my cruel comparison as justification for abandoning me in the most degrading circumstances possible, ensuring that my private moment of cruelty would become public entertainment that would follow me for months. The punishment didn't fit the crime, but I couldn't deny that there wouldn't have been a crime to punish if I'd been more thoughtful about how I expressed my relationship frustrations. 3 months later, I'm still dealing with the social consequences of that night. The photos and videos have mostly stopped circulating, but they're still findable for anyone who knows what to search for. Dating has become complicated because the story of my sex shop abandonment has become part of my reputation in certain circles. Men either assume I'm desperate and easy, or they're intimidated by the drama that seems to follow me around. I learned that cruel comments can inspire cruel revenge, and that people you think you know can be capable of elaborate humiliation schemes when their deepest insecurities are attacked. I learned that words spoken in private moments of intimacy can become public spectacles when they wound someone deeply enough to motivate calculated revenge. But mostly I learned that there's a difference between honest communication about relationship problems and cutting remarks designed to wound your partner's ego and self-worth. I said I couldn't tell the difference between him and my toy. He made sure I learned the difference. One humiliating night under a blinking pink neon sign at 2 a.m., soaking wet and abandoned, while strangers took photos and created memes out of my misery. The toy is consistent and doesn't abandon you outside adult stores in the rain. Alex, apparently, was capable of much more creative and devastating responses than I ever imagined. Now, every time I see that toy, I'm reminded that one moment of cruelty can inspire revenge that destroys not just your relationship, but your dignity and social reputation as well.